SHIFTA is a term used in Eritrea, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania and Somalia for rebel, outlaw or bandit. The word is derived from shufto, a Somali word for bandit. Historically, SHIFTA served as local militia in the lawless rural mountainous regions on the Horn of Africa. On the other hand, insurgency is an active revolt or uprising. Merging the two together, SHIFTA insurgency would only mean a revolt. In Kenya, the SHIFTA insurgency occurred between 1963 to 1967. Where there is smoke, there is fire, but fire does not exist without fuel and the ignition. What really started this fire? It all began in 1925 when a part of Jubaland, the present-day Somalia, was chopped off and given to Kenya, where it was named the North District Frontier, or the famous NDF, by the then white man's rule, the British. This part of the country was manned and controlled by the British rule. Movement in and out was only through passes, which was still issued by the same rule. In other words, this was a confined village. But despite the major lockdown, controlling the area was not a simple task for the British. The land having been cut off from Somalia, the people living in this area felt more Somali than Kenya. This sparked different ideologies as to who they really were. The people felt left out and abandoned by the government as well as the rest of the country at large.
The Somali people had been marginalized by the colonial government, especially after World War II, and the revolution had received military and financial assistance from Somali itself, who were in turn trained and funded by the Soviet Union. Winning this war was paramount for Kenya, which was a capitalist state and a friend of Western powers. So I'm sure you can understand how crucial this war was.
One thing is for sure, the British had no interest in this piece of land as it was arid and dry as opposed to other parts of the country like Central, which were fertile and therefore good production of food and perfect weather. This made it obvious that the North Frontier District would not have much of development as it had little to offer the British. With the little development, it meant no jobs, no schools, poor living conditions, insecurity and poor health conditions. This led to demoralization of the people living in the area. To further prove that the British cared less about the region, they appointed village elders to man the district as opposed to chiefs and governors, as it was the case with the rest of the country.
The tug of war between Somalia and Kenya in matters concerning northeastern continued all the way to the present day.
More and more youths, young men and women got radicalized so as to fight against the white man's rule and force him out of the North Frontier District to make it possible for the secession into Somalia. However, this was not to be tolerated by the government, and so the government banned any interaction of the outside communities with the communities in the North Frontier District.
When Kenya faced an insurgency problem in the 60s, it tormented these people into submission.
This would remain so until Kenya was given independence in the year 1963. The idea of independence in the minds of the Kenya Somali people in North Frontier District meant that they were finally being given secession they had long fought for. To their disappointment, the newly formed Kenyan government would hear none of that and instead termed them as enemies. The Kenyan government under the Prime Minister Jomo Kenyatta scaled up the already existing lockdown, worsening it by instilling the Manyatta policy, completely cutting them from the rest of the world. This encouraged ethnicity and agitation among the people of North Frontier District. As if that was not enough, a dawn to dusk curfew was instilled with order to shoot to kill anyone found outside from 6 p.m. What followed after this was constant retaliation from the people and use of force by the government to contain the situation. Human rights were a thing of the past, with the government fighting its own people. First, they were not allowed to take part in voting, let alone being given national identity cards, which clearly deprived them of their rights and opportunities other Kenyan citizens enjoyed. Secondly, they had no schools. Third, their cattle, which was their main livelihood, were massacred and torched by the armed forces, leaving them to languish in poverty. With little support, the people of North Frontier District were rendered weak and therefore fell into submission, ending the war in the year 1967. This, however, was not the end of it all. Yes, the government had won, but as it's evident, the war was simply taking a different turn. With the North Frontier District fully defeated, the people played foolish, luring the government into matriculating them as normal citizens. This was a success. They were promised jobs and education, among other things. A number of the youths also were trained as army men by the government in order to join the Kenyan army forces in instilling peace in nations. Still with the old spirit living in them, these army-trained youths eloped with the weapons to form a militia group famously known as Al-Shabaab. Since they were now empowered with weapons and training, they believed they'll bring the government into its knees for having suppressed them for many years.
By sending the KDF troops into Somalia to deal with the Al-Shabaab, the Kenyan government opened the door for the Al-Shabaab to enter Kenya, for the Al-Shabaab to start creating sleeper cells and planning terrorist activities in Kenya, which explains why Kenya is pretty much at war with itself.
This followed a series of attacks on the Kenyan soil. The government hence decided to launch an attack on Al-Shabaab dubbed Operation Linda Nchi so as to suppress the vicious group. There is no doubt that the operation will go on over a long time and in the near future.
The state collapse of the Somalian government also meant that there was little hope for an option for the Somali people. Even with that, however, the Kenyan state that had been fighting to keep them within its borders continued to kill them. And this is one of the things that continued to breed a lot of animosity between Kenyans and Somali. Kenya's actual reaction to the Somalia situation was without reason. It was mostly based on emotion and using force to drive a point home.
In conclusion, to avoid this bloodshed and the hassle, I believe that the North Frontier District should have been given their request from the word go so as to have a peaceful and harmonious Kenya we all take pride in. For MMU Radio, I am Lisbeth Kamau.